There's a rhyme that generations of American schoolchildren have grown up hearing, chanted on playgrounds without most of them ever knowing it was based on a real, brutal, double murder. It goes, Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41. It's catchy, it's dark, and like most things that become folklore, it isn't entirely accurate. But the murders behind it were very real, and more than 130 years later, nobody has ever been definitively proven guilty. A wealthy, uneasy household, Lizzie Andrew Borden was born on July 19, 1860, in Fall River, Massachusetts, a booming industrial city built on the textile trade. Her father, Andrew Borden, was one of the wealthiest men in town, holding stakes in local banks and significant commercial real estate. By all outward appearances, the Borden family had everything, but the household itself was far from peaceful. Lizzie's biological mother, Sarah, died when Lizzie was just 2 years old. 3 years later, Andrew remarried a woman named Abby Durfee Gray, and despite the passage of decades, Lizzie never fully accepted her stepmother. The two had a falling out years before the murders that was never truly repaired. Lizzie and her older sister Emma also frequently clashed with their father, often over money, inheritance, and Andrew's notoriously frugal nature, despite his considerable wealth. Beneath the respectable surface of a prominent Fall River family, there was real, simmering tension. The morning of August 4th, 1892. It was a hot summer morning. Bridget Sullivan, known to the family as Maggie, worked as the Bordens' live-in maid. She had spent the earlier part of the morning washing windows on the outside of the house, and by late morning she had gone up to her small attic room to rest. She heard the bell at Fall River's City Hall ring out. She checked her clock. It was 11 o'clock. What she didn't know yet was that inside that very house, 2 members of the Borden family were already dead. Andrew Borden's body was discovered on a sofa in the downstairs sitting room. He appeared to have been resting, perhaps napping, when he was attacked. His stepdaughter Lizzie would later claim she discovered his body approximately 30 minutes after he had returned home from running morning errands. Shortly after that discovery, Bridget went upstairs and found the body of Abby Borden, Lizzie's stepmother, in one of the second-floor guest bedrooms. Both victims had been struck repeatedly in the head and face with a hatchet, a small, sharp axe typically used for splitting kindling. The attacks were savage. Investigators would later determine that Abby had likely been killed first, roughly 90 minutes before Andrew, meaning her body had been lying upstairs undiscovered the entire time Andrew came home, sat down, and was murdered himself. Contrary to the famous rhyme, the actual number of blows was far smaller. Modern forensic analysis suggests the 2 victims received a combined total of around 29 strikes, not the 81 the poem describes. But no reduction in numbers makes the crime any less brutal. The attacks were focused almost entirely on the head and face, suggesting intense, personal rage rather than a calculated, distant act. Suspicion falls on Lizzie. Word of the murders spread through Fall River almost instantly, and then across the entire country. This wasn't simply a random act of violence in a poor or troubled part of town. This was one of the city's wealthiest, most respectable families. The idea that someone from within genteel Victorian society could be capable of something this savage captured the nation's imagination. Almost immediately, suspicion turned toward Lizzie herself. She was notably the only member of the household who claimed to be home at the time of both murders, and her explanations for her whereabouts during the crucial time windows shifted slightly with each retelling. On August 11, 1892, just 1 week after the murders, Lizzie Borden was formally arrested. The evidence and its problems fall. River police did recover a hatchet on the property discovered in the basement, but by the time it was found and examined, it appeared to have been cleaned. There was no visible blood, no hair, nothing conclusively tying it to the murders. This was, in part, a reflection of just how young forensic science still was in 1892. Fingerprint identification techniques existed but were rarely used properly by local police departments at the time. Fall River investigators failed to properly collect or preserve potential fingerprint evidence from the crime scene or the weapon itself, meaning that even if the killer had left prints behind, they were never usable in any meaningful way. Perhaps the most suspicious piece of circumstantial evidence to emerge was this. A few days after the murders, Lizzie was reported to have burned a blue dress in the kitchen stove. Her explanation was that the dress had been ruined by wet paint and was no longer wearable. Prosecutors, understandably, viewed the timing with deep suspicion, but no actual blood-stained clothing was ever recovered as physical evidence, leaving the burned dress as a compelling but ultimately circumstantial detail rather than concrete proof. A trial that captivated the nation. Following a grand jury indictment, Lizzie Borden's murder trial began in June of 1893, nearly a year after the killings. It quickly became a national sensation, covered extensively by newspapers across the country. Courtroom sketches, detailed testimonies, autopsy reports, and daily front-page updates kept the public utterly transfixed. Part of what made the trial so remarkable, beyond the crime itself, was what it revealed about the era. The extensive documentation produced during the case, the interviews, the forensic reports, the witness statements, offers modern historians an unusually detailed window into the life of a 32-year-old woman in a New England mill town at the end of the 19th century, at a time when women's voices and daily lives were rarely so thoroughly documented. A trial stacked in her favor. Lizzie's family wealth afforded her an exceptionally skilled legal defense team, including a former governor of Massachusetts, a man who, notably, had personally appointed one of the 3 judges who would go on to preside over her very trial. That judge later delivered jury instructions that one major newspaper of the time openly described as reading like, in their words, a plea for the defendant's innocence rather than neutral legal guidance. The court also excluded a critical piece of prosecution evidence, testimony regarding Lizzie's prior attempt to purchase prussic acid, a deadly poison, in the days before the murders. The defense argued, successfully, that the prosecution had failed to rule out entirely innocent reasons she might have wanted such a substance, and the testimony was kept from the jury entirely. Finally, the jury pool itself worked in Lizzie's favor. Fall River, the city where the murders occurred and where public suspicion ran highest, was excluded from the jury selection process. The jury instead was drawn heavily from smaller, rural, agricultural towns in the surrounding county. Roughly half the jurors were farmers, the rest were tradesmen. A group, some historians argue, less inclined to believe a genteel, church-going young woman from a prominent family could be capable of such violence. The verdict. After a trial spanning weeks, the jury deliberated for roughly 90 minutes before returning their verdict: not guilty. The speed of that deliberation speaks volumes. With the inquest testimony excluded and with the prussic acid evidence kept out of the record entirely, the prosecution's remaining case rested almost entirely on circumstantial evidence. An ash-covered hatchet head that might have been the murder weapon, and a burned dress that might have been stained with blood. Might have been. That lingering uncertainty left more than enough room for reasonable doubt. Lizzie Borden walked out of that Massachusetts courthouse a free woman. No one else was ever charged with the murders of Andrew and Abby Borden. To this day, the case remains officially unsolved. Life after acquittal, however, did not mean acceptance. Though legally cleared, Lizzie was never truly welcomed back into Fall River's polite society. Whispers followed her for the rest of her life. Using their father's substantial inheritance, Lizzie and her sister Emma purchased a large, elegant home in Fall River's fashionable hill neighborhood, the very kind of address Lizzie had reportedly always wanted, even before the murders. The home, which they named Maplecroft, featured 7 bedrooms and 6 fireplaces, a stark, almost uncomfortable symbol of the wealth that many believed had been the true motive behind her parents' deaths. Lizzie Borden died on June 1, 1927, at the age of 66, from complications related to pneumonia. Remarkably, her older sister Emma died just 9 days later. A legend born from real blood. In the century since her acquittal, Lizzie Borden has become something far larger than the woman she actually was. A cultural legend referenced in countless books, films, television series, and of course, that enduring, chilling nursery rhyme that continues to misrepresent the actual details of the crime, even as it keeps her name alive in the public imagination. The house at 232nd Street in Fall River, where Andrew and Abby Borden were murdered that August morning, still stands today. It now operates as a bed and breakfast, where visitors can not only stay overnight in the very rooms where the killings occurred, but can also take guided tours detailing the case, minute by minute. More than 130 years later, historians, true crime researchers, and armchair detectives continue to debate the same fundamental question that divided that Massachusetts courtroom in 1893. Did Lizzie Borden truly murder her father and stepmother in cold blood and simply have the wealth, the legal team, and the social standing to walk away from it? Or was an innocent woman wrongly suspected, her reputation forever destroyed by a crime she never committed? No one alive today can say for certain, and perhaps that's exactly why, more than a century later, we're still asking.